Well, welcome back, everyone, to the latest Geolytix podcast, one of a series looking behind the scenes of how Geolytix operates and the impact of AI on Geolytix and its customers and, I guess, society in general. I'm joined by two more of the Geolytix teams. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I was going to introduce Geolytix first and then myself. So Geolytix, we're sort of a full service location planning company. So we build geodata for over 100 countries. We build predictive models and we sort of deliver that within our own cloud-based mapping system. And we primarily work with retailers, but other organizations as well. And essentially people might come to us and say, where should I open my next 5 shops? Or where should I open my next 500 shops? Or how should I optimize my network now that more of my sales are coming from the delivery channel? Any sort of location-based questions to do with sort of store networks is what we help people with. And I'm Alison Moriarty, so I'm a location planner by trade. So I did a lot of location planning in-house at places like Tesco across different countries for many years. And then at Geolytix, I work in the customer team. So I basically help make sure that the answers and solutions that we build for customers sort of answer their questions and give the best possible tools for them to work with.
Great, thanks, Alison. It's good to see someone has worked on both sides of the process. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm Freddie Wallace. So I joined Geolytix as a placement student 4 years ago now. And since then, I've worked in a variety of roles, but most of my time has been spent building out the mapping platform originally. And then since then, I've transformed through analytics and currently working as a data scientist. So I guess on the other side of the business to Alison, but I've sort of done the full run of that.
Wow, wonderful. Okay, so Alison, Freddie, today what we really want to talk about is what's the actual impact on AI going to be on all of us, on our day-to-day lives in terms of for the customers of Geolytix, how might they interact differently with the company? How might they use their tools differently? And then I think what's equally interesting is how is it going to impact on your lives? How is behind the scenes Geolytix going to do things differently? So Alison, can I start with you? With your focus on the customer, how will it be different using AI at some point in the future compared to today?
Yeah, so on that point about how we're going to interact differently with the tools and the data, I think it's quite exciting that there's really a spectrum and we can make it much more personalized. So I guess at the moment we sort of design user roles. So we sort of say this person is doing this sort of thing. So we'll design the tooling around that. But I guess with AI, so LLMs and natural language and agents, we could sort of design much more personalized sort of, so it might be I'm in the boardroom or I'm standing in front of a site with a phone and I just want a really succinct paragraph telling me the key things about this site. Is it a good location? What does the model say? Just give me a quick hit of information, like wherever I am, just really easily. Or at the other end of the spectrum, and I guess someone like me who really likes to get into all the data and like more and more information and triangulate and validate and sort of say, is there anything else that can help me believe this forecast or this recommendation? And again, it's just different ways it's just much easier to access the information with potential that AI offers, I suppose.
So you've got a more personalized approach then, or one that's more focused on the context of that particular problem or that particular point in time.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of having a summary version that's on your mobile device as opposed to the rich version you might have back at your desktop. Brilliant. Yeah. Freddie, what about yourself? How do you see things different for the customer in terms of using AI?
Yeah, I guess I kind of echo Alison's thoughts in the fact that we can personalize it a lot more. I think traditionally it might have been, you go to the person who's confident with the maps in the office and you say to them they're a geospatial analyst, or can you pull out the number of stores within 3 miles of this location for me? They go away, maybe buffer it out in QGIS or write a little query, pull it back. But with sort of natural language and agents, we can perhaps come to a point where that sort of becomes less of an analyst job. They're sort of quick queries and people are able to engage with that sort of thing through natural language, and they can simply just sort of type into maps, say, for example, how many stores within 3 miles, and it can go away. And because it will understand the sort of data, because it's tagged up, and we sort of tell it how it can pull that through a semantic layer, they'll be able to do that themselves.
So let's dig in that a little bit more detail, because I probably like yourselves and probably many of the people listening. I was the GIS guy. I was the guy that would be able to use the GIS software to create a buffer, to do the overlays. Are you saying that I'm a dinosaur now? I don't need GIS guys?
No, I definitely wouldn't say that. I think there's still definitely going to be space in sort of more complex model building, or even in sort of building the behind the scenes tools that the GIS people are still involved in. And that's me. I don't want to write myself out of a job here. But yeah, I think it'll more be you're involved in sort of setting up the behind the scenes and the semantic layers that people are able to sort of self-serve, rather than having to do quite repetitive one-off bits of analysis tasks. But then there'll definitely still be room to get involved in the more exciting stuff, the models. I think that's what I'm most looking forward to, with like AI advancing, not being written out of a job, but actually being able to spend more of my time doing things I enjoy than, the sort of entry level tasks, I guess.
That's right, isn't it? I mean, I guess, for a long time, our industry was, I suppose, constrained, or there was a lot of friction to do with data processing and getting the right data and getting it processed, and then the orchestration of doing one step after another step after another step. I get the sense from what you're saying that that's the bit that gets automated, so we can think about the bigger problems. Is that right?
Yeah. I guess it's the fact that eventually you will trust an AI. I think you will get to the point where you trust an LLM's coding ability enough, and its knowledge of our database enough that you would get to a point where you'd be happy with it. Again, I keep going back to a sort of buffer, but that sort of level of query, I feel like people will eventually gain confidence in it. And, that's easily validatable. You can, if you really want to, you can pop it up on a map and go around and count them, like if you really didn't trust it. But I guess where you get sort of more into still wanting a human in the loop, say, might be where, it is a bit behind the scenes, and there's lots of different pieces of data plugging into a model, for example, versus just there's 2 layers, let's join them.
Right. So I think that, there's that element that this is about automating more tasks than we've been able to do in the past. Alison, from your point of view, how does that kind of increased level of automation allow your customers to do perhaps things differently, or do a different range of analysis than they'd be able to do in the past?
I think partly it's just who within the organisation would access the data and the tooling. So it just democratizes it a little bit. You can sort of, anyone can just access things more easily and get answers more easily. And I think it means we can integrate, or they can integrate us more deeply into the decision-making processes. So whereas it's slightly linked to the topic, but we were talking about how, we typically predict the sales forecast for a given location, and then we might build a blueprint based on the model that predicts that. But then we're sort of saying there's more to that decision than obviously here's the blueprint, here's the forecast revenue. It's like, are there any units available of the right size? What's the rent like? What's the churn like? And all this additional sort of environmental data. And we're sort of saying actually with AI, you can just integrate much more close to live information, much more context, so that decision can be a bit more well-rounded. So I think it's quite interesting that it might mean that different levels of decision makers can make use of our data, and in the way it's sort of integrated with sort of wider context, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And this idea of increasing accessibility, I think is a really powerful one, because we want to make sure that the decisions we make are based on good knowledge, good data, good understanding. And it sounds like this is a way of improving that. Are there any other elements of this from your customer perspective that we need to talk about before we go and look behind the scenes and look at how AI is going to change your jobs?
I suppose we were just going to, talk about the fact that most of our customers are making quite big investment decisions. So it's, 10 years worth plus of investment, multi-million pounds of spend. So it's not, it's not like a throwaway, some sort of magical AI model says one thing one day, and then the next day the model's been recalibrated and you get a different number and you don't really know why. Like the sort of the foundational kind of core bits that we build are just really important. And
I think like particularly if you're talking about like LLMs, what everyone's aware of, ChatGPT, Gemini, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The way that they're probably first going to come into like the geospatial world and data is sort of at the bottom of the pack, in my opinion. I mean, we spoke in previous episodes about how you'd sort of build a model and your gold standard would be your census data. It's been used for years.
Yeah.
And then more recently, you'd bring in maybe loyalty card data, mobility data, so where people's phones are pinging, where's the busy hotspots. You might bring in bank spend data and so on and so forth. And I think all of that is still going to be the most important and comes from the human. But where the LLMs can help is sort of what's being said on the internet at the minute, what maybe posts on social media, because they are ultimately language and it is really good at interacting with those. But I do feel that is just quite a nice overlay on the model that's built primarily on the census and then your customer data.
Yeah.
It's just that sort of overlay on top. But I mean, even then you've got to be careful. I think, for example, the other day we asked an LLM about a grocery site and it brought back saying, oh, you've missed this Aldi that's opening. And it turned out to be a joke post from a pub on April Fool's Day telling its customers it was being closed down and turned into an Aldi on this road. And it said, so there's still got to be, in a way, the human in the loop to understand like the nuances of social media and the way humans interact. But I do think it is useful to sort of flag as that overlay what we might not necessarily do at the minute because you're sort of focused on your standard data bricks.
Right. No, and I think that's really important. I think it's a recurring theme, this idea of trust, and trust is and has been crucially important to your business because, as you said, Alison, you're making, multi-million pound investment decisions based on this. And we can see all the value and the power of AI, but that trust needs to be maintained. And that idea of the human in the loop and that not disappearing, I think is a really strong message. I think if someone's not saying this, that would be a concern. So I'm really pleased to hear about that. So let's flip it then and say, okay, potentially it means that, this technology, what you do becomes more accessible to your customers. They may interact with you in a slightly different way, less kind of GIS geeky. But what does it mean for you actually in the office? How does your life change because of AI? Freddie, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I would preface this by saying that I work on sort of different levels of projects in different markets. And that is fundamentally going to change how you interact with AI just because of, I guess, the spatial inequality and how rich geodata is, how open it is across the planet.
So what we're talking about here is data availability, fundamentally, right?
Precisely. So, in some markets, and particularly in less developed countries, they don't have quite as much open data as we would have, for example, here in the UK. So the sort of overlaying, the sense checking that I spoke about before might become more important in those markets. And you actually might use LLMs to inform, to infill that gap in local knowledge, sort of vibe check and that sense check, which you can pull from, reviews, text written about an area or a retail place or a town anywhere in the world. So it might help to infill your knowledge there. But then if we flip it back to the opposite end of the spectrum in the UK where we have the richest data, it might be the fact that, we begin to train more complex ML models or geospatial foundation models, which could ultimately change the way in which we approach modeling. Like from the very beginning, if you do have this sort of data-rich view of the UK and a pre-trained geospatial foundation model, for each client, then you're not really starting from the very start like we would. Yeah. Like we would now, building out a feature matrix and so on and so forth. So yeah, I really do think it depends on which market you're working in.
But then I guess that's, you will say, a reflection of your expertise, isn't it? Saying, okay, we had these new modeling approaches, very much data dependent, but we have that understanding, we have that knowledge, we apply the correct models based on the data that's available to us. That's where you're earning your money in terms of making those decisions.
Yeah, and that's definitely still happening now. Like we're obviously putting an AI spin on it here, but ultimately it might be that in some of these markets where you have less data at the minute, you're just working with a scorecard model because that's the best solution. Yeah. And in the UK, you might already be working with an ML model because you are still data rich. So whilst it is putting an AI spin on it, it isn't fundamentally going to change the sort of modeling decisions we're making already at the minute.
Good. So your job's not going to be replaced by a machine in the near future then?
Hopefully not.
Very good. All right, Alison, are you still going to be here? Do you still have a job?
Yeah, who knows? It's really hard to see the future. And obviously at the moment, there's sort of this weird dissonance between like, you see this stuff out there that's just like mind-blowingly good, and then you do your day-to-day and it doesn't really affect you that much. And you sort of, maybe there's an inflection point where those two things come closer together. But at the moment, I'm definitely just a bit of a dabbler. I don't really do much coding or anything anyway. So I'm just more using, experimenting and playing. And there's not a lot of my sort of workflow that's like very similar every day or repeatable. It's all every day's different. I'm talking to customers and I want to talk to them with my own language as a human. But, we have those sorts of relationships. It's not like I'm sending 100 standard emails a day or anything like that.
And I'm sure your customers are very appreciative of being able to talk to you. And I think that's a really important part of this. Those relationships that you have with your customers. We've mentioned how important, trust is and trust in, you using their data and coming up with appropriate suggestions and analytical processes and so on. It's very important, I guess, for you to say that, we're still here. You're not going to be dealing with an agent who's going to be, a machine that's talking to you. That human contact is really important.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, I think when sometimes I do look at specific sites to help customers understand things, and, just that it is really incredible sometimes how you can just use an LLM and just the stuff it can synthesize and tell you really quickly about a place that you would have spent days or hours researching just to sort of enhance the data we've already got. So, tell me what the main car parks are in this centre and how many spaces they've got. And, that you can get that in seconds, which isn't quickly available to you outside of chatting to an LLM, for example. Yeah. So I think just that ability to quickly synthesize much more information about a place that traditionally you'd have to do quite a lot of legwork to understand. And obviously you want to validate it and make sure it's not hallucinations and it's only part of the puzzle of the decision making. But I do think like it is quite mind-blowing sometimes the stuff you can quickly get back from just having a chat with an LLM. So,
it is that superpower, isn't it? That ability to synthesize content. It's particularly as we've said in large language models, it is an incredible capability. But I'm very taken by this term you both made the most of, the human in the loop. I think that's really important moving forward. So we've said, there are clearly going to be impacts on your customers. There are going to be impacts to yourselves, the way that Geolytix operates behind the scenes, more automation, the ability to do things at perhaps a different scale. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned that you think is important in terms of fundamentally how we work that we haven't mentioned?
I think a lot of it is just about, I don't think there's going to be some massive revolution that completely changes what we do or how we do it or that kind of thing. It's just a sort of incrementally improving lots of different things. And a lot of it may just be about efficiency and just being able to do things a bit faster. But some of it will be about breadth, so we can just get more data from more places more quickly. Some of it will be about more depth. So like I say, you can just really, whereas we might have data sets that say, here's all the hospitals, we might be able to get to a data set very quickly through AI that says, here are all the hospitals, here's how many beds they have, here's how many people work there, here's blah, blah, blah. So I think it's, it's hard to sort of talk about it as just one thing, because there's just all these different ways in which it could help either the way we do stuff internally or the quality of the products and the data and the outputs and the models that we can offer to customers. So
yeah, no, I agree. I definitely think, let's take agents, for example. I don't think we're ever going to be at a point where my agent speaks to the client's agent and they decide what they want between them. I think that's just crazy. But I do think that, for example, our agents within our mapping platform might be something that people get to grips with one day, and instead of, opening a filter panel and dragging it along and zoom into a location, you might say, again, show me top 3 places for a gym in Manchester. And it might go to Manchester and drop the seed points and then drag the filters to show you, the sort of top 3 places. But then it's not going to go away and say, this is the one we're opening, the agent, and say, this is the decision. It's just getting to a point where the human requires less time to pull out those top 3 places.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good summary, actually, of our discussion. There's going to be significant changes. We are going to be able to do more. We're going to be able to do things in different ways. But crucially, and I think that's really important for both the staff and the customers of Geolytix, there's always a human in the loop. And that trust is going to be maintained because of that. I think it's a great story, and it's a great way to finish our discussion. So, Alison, Freddie, thank you very much for your time. I hope you, sitting at home, have enjoyed this conversation, and you'll join us for the next Geolytix podcast. Thank you.